Greetings and welcome to another version of allhorsetalk.com. I'm Alita Bunny Hendricks, your host, and I am speaking to you today from terrific island of St. Croix, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I have a special guest today, and my guest is Mrs. Betty Skiok. Betty has been a friend of mine for many, many, many years, and she's a close family friend. And hello, Betty.
Hi.
And Betty, I want to ask you, where are you from originally?
Kentucky.
And your beginnings with horses began how?
With Kentucky saddlebreds, basically. I had ridden 1 year when I was in boarding school in the 4th or 5th grade, and then I rode saddle horses until I learned about hunters and jumpers. And 14, 15, and then I became a series rider.
And then, wow, that is terrific. So you began smack in the middle of one of the richest horse states that we have in the United States, and you've traveled extensively. Did you ride anywhere else other than Kentucky?
I rode 2 years in college, in Boston and in Virginia, and that was in the 50s. And riding at that time was making a slow evolution. I also rode a lot in Vermont for 3 summers. That's what switched me to hunters and jumpers, and a totally different type of style.
Well, this is a far reach from Vermont and Kentucky, etc. How did you end up in St. Croix?
That's a story you don't want to get into, but basically my mother moved here and I followed her down, and mother moved to St. Thomas in 1959, and I followed her down here in 61, spent a year in St. Thomas, and then went back to Kentucky and came back here for good in 65.
So you've been here a good long while, and you raised your family here?
I married a Crucian, a man from St. Croix, and my daughter was raised here, and she still lives here with her 2 children.
And your daughter was quite an avid equestrian herself.
You, I guess.
That's it. That's exactly
almost,
right.
Almost.
It was through your daughter Eileen,
Yeah.
through clinics down here. I want to ask, we'll see a little bit of a slice of at least one Croix pony, native pony, a little bit later. Where did the horses that originally inhabited the island, where did they originally come from? Because they weren't native here.
I've never really, it's a great question. I'm going to try to start investigating that, but I would assume that they were brought in by the sugarcane planters and the Danish owners, probably imported horses from the United States or Spain or Puerto Rico. I doubt if it was really Puerto Rico. That came later with the sugarcane industry, the modern sugarcane industry. They needed, they brought in Pasafinos, and I guess they bred the horses with the horses that they had imported from the States, and they came up with our little island pony, and then because they're insular, they were a small horse, a very sturdy horse. Now I'm speaking of the horses I first met here in the 60s by this time. And yes, there's always been gentlemen racing on St. Croix, and they're always in the early 20s, they brought in horses from Chile and breeding horses. And you can see once in a while, you'll see a horse that goes back that the Virgin Island government brought in stallions, sort of on the remount type of thing, where the planters could take their mares to the stallions and breed them. That was mostly to get size. But sugar was out by the 60s, or the late 60s. And what you basically had were little cart ponies and little cart and donkey carts on the island. They were still in use by families you would see going down the road. We still drive on the left-hand side of the road today because they say they couldn't retrain the donkeys.
I wondered why we still drove on the left-hand side of the road. I got to do that yesterday for the first time in many years, and at first it was a challenge.
It is.
So you couldn't retrain the donkeys for pulling the carts.
Then in the 60s, horse racing took off more on a stateside standard. It still was not quite what you would know if you went to a track in the States. And they started importing thoroughbreds. Well, most of the thoroughbreds that got imported were not sound, and they were stallions. And when they had finished their racing career, they were usually just turned loose on the roads and in the old sugarcane land and this type of thing. They bred with their wonderful little Crucian pony, and we went through a couple of decades of the ugliest horses you've ever seen, which were thoroughbreds and pony cross. Our Crucian ponies, you never saw a split. You never saw leg problems with them. And they lived a long time.
So they seem to grow stronger bone-wise. I wonder, do you know if there's any mineral content in the soil that would attribute that?
Probably so. I mean, I've never looked into that.
Right.
All of our well water. But these are just ponies that were sturdy little ponies, and they could carry 200-pound men a long way chasing cattle or going through the cane fields. But then when they started breeding with the thoroughbreds, we started getting our leg problems.
Okay.
And when I first came here, I used to go out and we would go horse hunting when we first started Pony Club, and the average price for a Pony Club horse was probably $25 to $50. Times have changed.
Times have changed. So, being here, tell me about your climate and how that affects your shelter needs, etc., for your horses.
Our horses live outdoors. Very rarely do we have stabled horses. The racetrack will have them. The racing horses will have stables. Our climate is very nice. Once in a while, during hurricane season, it gets bad. Or during rainy season, the horses will have to deal with funguses and hoof rot, thrush, this type of thing, because there isn't any place for them to go that is dry. Then we go immediately within a week. We will go from 2 wet conditions to 2 dry conditions, and because we have these beautiful trade winds that keep us cool. During hurricane season, or the trade winds die down, it gets very humid, it gets very hot. The horses seem to develop. It's also the same time when everything's going to seed, so they seem to develop breathing problems. And all the black horses turn into buckskins from sunburn coats. But basically they aren't. And if we do get a storm, we open all of our gates. All the horses will get turned loose. The ones that are installed should be taken out of them. And I only know of, between Hurricane Hugo, which was our first hurricane, and many, probably since 1928 to 1989. Then we had a series, Maryland, and a few others. But in all those years, I only know of 3 horses that have been killed because of a hurricane. One, a tree fell on. He was straight off the track. The other one, a barn fell on. And the third one, we don't know what killed it. There's a house up on the hill, and the man who owns the house looks out during the eye. And he said one time he called me. We still had phone service for some reason. He called me. He said, "Well, I'm counting 12 horses and 12 regular horses and 1 white horse lying down on the hill opposite his house." And they had all just gone up on the hill, and they had laid down during the storm.
Really?
That was Hurricane Maryland.
Really? Goodness.